Hello everyone.
Hi.
Hi there. How are you all today?
Good, thanks.
All good? Is everybody okay? Can you all hear me and got your audio on? And I've got sort of a couple of people that we're still waiting for, but just wanted to say hello to everybody and thank you very much for joining us today. I will let other people come into the session as they join, but would like to start quite promptly because I know time is precious. And we are aiming to finish at sort of 12 o'clock-ish, if that's okay for everybody today. So hello, welcome. This is the Kickstart Your Digital Conversations workshop today. And I am Sally Ryan. I'm going to be talking to you really about sort of all things social media, and hopefully we'll sort of have a little look through some of the different social media platforms that are being used at the moment, business. And also it's going to be a bit of an interactive session. So I've tried to break it up so that you all have a little bit of time to do some work in some small groups, if that's okay. So that we're going to be, fingers crossed, using the breakout rooms as well. So really lovely to have everybody here. Is it okay if I just do a little bit of housekeeping sort of first of all, just so that we kind of get everybody familiarised with how we're going to use the time today. First of all, if you've got a mobile phone with you, that might be quite useful for you. Hello, Davey, welcome. It might be quite useful because I will be asking you if you want to look for sort of like some tweets or Facebook posts that you, perhaps your organisation has been involved with and use those in the small group session. So please do feel free, have your mobile phones, if they are a smartphone, available to you, but perhaps if you could pop them onto silent, that would be most helpful. And what I would also like to say is that if anybody has any need in terms of comfort break, you really desperately need a cup of tea or something like that, now's your time. Get yourself prepared. But also, obviously, I do appreciate that sometimes we might have an Amazon delivery arriving at an unexpected moment. So if you really do need to pop out for a moment, please just do that. Come back into the session as you need to. 2 hours can be a bit of a lot, you know, a bit of time to sit in one place and keep that sort of focus. So I'd really like to kind of have this as a safe space for people. It is an informal session, so it's really about what you need to get out of the session. So please do get yourselves nicely set up, comfy, so that we're all good and ready to go. Is that okay with everybody? Yeah. Fabulous. I'm not particularly going to ask you to go on to mute or anything of that nature. If you would like to, you're very welcome. So, you know, I will leave that up to you. The way that we're going to actually use the time today is I've tried to break the session up into sort of 3 sections. Hello, Charlotte. Just doing introductions and kind of hellos and setup at the moment. So at the end of each sort of talky bit, what I'd really like to do is then kind of pop you into pre-assigned, which is a random generator. I haven't kind of like gone down a list and whatever, I'm just allowing Zoom to do that for me. But you pop you into a breakout session. So you'll have small group work with maybe sort of 3 of you in that particular session for about 5 minutes. And then we'll kind of come back in and start the next section. There is a sort of Q&A, open discussion at the end of it. So if anything's come up through the session that you have a burning question, that would be a particularly good time. And the one thing I would say, particularly in the with the premise of wanting this to be a safe space for everybody, I might be your facilitator, but we all have something to contribute today because we've all run social media, we've all looked at social media, whether it's personal, whether it's business. So please do feel that you can contribute and you can ask. And as I say, you may have come across something, tried something that would help somebody else within the group. So please do feel free. If you want to ask any really sort of burning questions, perhaps sort of while I'm doing the intro talks to the sections. There is the chat board, which is down the bottom, which hopefully everybody can see. I'm sort of guessing that most of us are perhaps reasonably comfortable with being on a Zoom platform, but just so that you know, we are recording this. It may be used for marketing purposes. It will probably go onto the iSE YouTube channel afterwards. So if you are at all uncomfortable about your face being seen, please do pop your audio off. If you really do feel uncomfortable about face and name, being used sort of on the final video that gets uploaded to YouTube, then do feel free, pop out of the session now and pick it up on YouTube yourself, where you can watch and view at your own leisure. Is that okay with everybody? Yeah? The other thing I would say is that I have put together some resources which I hope will be useful, and I know that Paul is going to share those at the end of this session with your follow-up email. So by all means, if you need any support, any help, either speak to Paul or ask if you want to come back to me, and I'm more than happy to do a follow-up phone call if anybody's got any burning questions. Is that all right? Lovely. So I'm going to pop this onto sort of speaker view, just really for the recording, and I hope that that will all work very nicely. One of the things that I think would be quite useful is probably just to say a little bit about myself in terms of why I am kind of talking to you today. So my background is 20 plus years in marketing, events management, social media, content and copywriting. And I've worked with a number of social enterprises and worked across the sector for about 10 years now. So a reasonable amount of sort of experience in my background. And I hope that maybe that will kind of come through in some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So what I would be really interested in is, has everybody got a pen and paper with them, or a notebook of some description? Yeah. So it'd be really, really helpful to me, and I hope for yourselves, is if you could just take a moment and pop down 3 words that describe kind of how you're feeling really at the moment. So that could be about how you feel about social media, and we're talking about this within a business context, but obviously, for example, if many people have a Facebook account personally, they might not use or be responsible for their business Facebook account, but you might feel quite confident about Facebook or about social media generally. You might be feeling quite curious. Something that you're not terribly familiar with, you might be feeling a bit scared, which is absolutely okay, because most of us are here to learn in some fashion. So could you just take a moment and just pop down your 3 words about how you're feeling, because we will come back to those at the end of the session. So I'll just give you a moment to do that. Everybody's looking very studious. Okay, are we all done? Kind of found 3 words? They could be quite a mix. Would anybody like to share their 3 words at all at this moment? And you don't have to by any means, but I don't know if anybody would like to kind of introduce themselves and perhaps use any of their 3 words to say a little bit about sort of what they maybe are hoping to get out of the session today. Any volunteers? Pop a hand up. No? Okay, then that's absolutely fine. Oh, Davey, yes, do. Turn your audio on, Davey. You're on mute at the moment.
Yep, I'm Davey. Yeah, I think the 3 words that kind of came to mind. One was inquisitive.
Okay.
Yeah, I have some basic social media knowledge, but not in terms of the business. Anticipation was another word. Yeah, and and the third one was pleading.
That's a good adjective.
Yeah, and that's kind of in relation to our organisation is not very social media savvy. The majority of and actually quite a lot of the people who work for us actually don't have any kind of social media exposure at all.
Okay, so that's kind of quite interesting. I appreciate you being very candid with that. That's really, really super helpful. Does anybody kind of resonate, have any of maybe the same kind of similar 3 words in their set? No? Oh, yes, hello, Emily, down the bottom. You're on mute at the moment. That's
am I?
Thank you.
Okay.
Perfect.
So I think I'd take one of your words in terms of curious, because I think sometimes they can be a little bit in terms of how to access analytics and things like that. I'd like to know more about the platforms themselves, like the extent to which you could utilize them, because I know they have a lot of features that go beyond what you use personally, especially if you're using it for business use. So I think that's definitely something that I'd like to find out. And also, I don't want to say scared, but maybe a little bit scared in terms of it's just so public that you just don't want to say the wrong thing, or you don't want to, I think maybe sometimes you don't know if something you might say might be, I don't know, I think given the context of the situation now as well, you don't know what kind of attraction you might get. So yeah, probably something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't bring your personal opinion into the business social media too much. So it's just about knowing that boundary, really.
Okay, that's really helpful, and I think a lot of people are quite concerned about use of language, sensitivity, particularly at the moment, you know, sensitivity to sort of digital overload, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you're quite right, we do have to be mindful, because more so when we are managing or contributing to social media accounts on behalf of our enterprises, we are brand ambassadors for our enterprise, even if you're not named in terms of managing the account, kind of thing. But you know, there is a sensitivity and a consciousness there, and I think you're quite right, Marnie, that people are a little bit confused about some of the right language to use. So obviously, you know, things like we've just had Black Lives Matter through October, and when all of that kind of really surged a couple of months ago, I know that talking to people, there were quite a lot of people going, I'm really scared whether I'm using the appropriate, latest, correct, politically correct language and phrasing. So you're quite right, it's something that inevitably social media we have to keep on top of. There's no holy grail in sense of social media, because it is a continuum, it's constantly evolving, new platforms come up, they move away, and obviously, yes, the sort of how we present our businesses should constantly evolve, because we should always be looking forward, what can we do better, what are the new emerging trends, that kind of thing. So it's an interesting one. We have sort of an hour and a half sort of within the topics. If I don't cover everything that immediately are part of people's wants, so Marnie, you said there about analytics. I'm not particularly going deep into analytics at the moment, but I'm more than happy, if that's useful, I can look for some good guides, kind of thing, and include that in the resource pack. Or we could have a sort of a one-to-one chat about that, because obviously what I'm also looking to try and do is make this practical and useful for everybody that has shared their time with us today. So is that okay with everybody? Yeah. Is everybody kind of like, okay, maybe if we sort of like hang on to your 3 words, keep those to one side at the moment, and as I say, we'll kind of come back to those a little bit at the end, if that's okay. So I'm just going to do some screen sharing with you all, if you'll bear with me for a moment. Okay, is everybody okay and can see that screen share? A little bit of a thumbs up if that's all right with you. Lovely. Okay, so we've I've called this Kickstart Your Digital Conversations. So I'm working on the basis that obviously I know all of you have come through the Wellbeing Living Well Consortium, and that you are established enterprises. But being an established enterprise doesn't always mean that we are comfortable with every role that we have to get involved with across our enterprises. So as an example, you might be really, really good at looking after adults with learning disability or working with people around mental health challenges. That doesn't mean that you in yourself are a marketing expert or that you feel necessarily comfortable about that. So what we're going to do today is just kind of take a fairly sweeping view across social media, what it is, where it can root from, sort of language and tone, but also the different platforms, how they could be utilised, and also then sort of looking at how we tell our story a little bit through our social media. So those are the sort of three sections that I'm going to cover, which I've kind of worded here as big picture, the jigsaw puzzle, which is all the different platforms, and then telling the story, so change the world. So those are the sort of the three areas that we're going to, at this point, focus on. So I've said a little bit about hello, and we've written our 3 words down, which we, as I say, will come back to towards the end of the session. So I hope that's a sort of going to be an interesting comparison for people about what they've picked up today. So first of all, our sort of social media. I would really like to kind of go back a step or two, because obviously our social media is really a reflection of our enterprises. And so we probably need to go back and actually look at who we are in the sense of our enterprise, our business context. And also sort of what the passions are, what the values are around our enterprises and the language that we use. And also to understand more of the platforms that we currently have. So one of the things that I always find is that coming from a branding background, it's really easy to say, oh, this pink squiggle represents light engineering, and I can talk to you about that. But actually the bit that's really important, as well as the logo and the branding, is actually going back and doing that values-based piece within enterprises, because fundamentally that's where your marketing messaging, your communication style for your business starts. So understanding what the culture of your organisation is, what the values within your organisation are, because that will kind of set the tone. And it may well be that I think most people kind of would put down, you know, we're honest and we act with integrity and we care and many of those sorts of things. But I think digging really deep into your organisation, it also influences, you know, how you recruit people, and that is covered by your social media presence as well, because we use social media now to recruit into our organisations. It sets the tone for the culture of the organisation, so the people that contribute within it, and also who we are in terms of our customers and our stakeholders. So all of those things are really, really important before we actually start looking at social media per se, because if we actually need to consider that we have multiple stakeholders for our organisation, we might need to consider that we have a slightly different language and tone for different stakeholder groups, for example. So does anybody have sort of multiple stakeholder groups? Do you have maybe sort of commissioners of your service as well as customers of your service, for example? Would that be fair? Yeah. And sometimes it can be quite difficult because you might have not just 2, but 3 or 4 different stakeholder groups. So if you've got partners that you work with, if you've got the commissioners, you've got the grant givers, you've got internal communications, and internal communications and social media often gets very left behind, and is as equally as important that your staff teams, your team members, your colleagues have as much information as you're putting out externally. And we've all seen, you know, in fairly recent times where perhaps on social media, somebody's sort of said of their own business, well, first thing I heard about this was on, you know, a tweet or something like that. So being mindful that social media and our marketing and communications messaging is an internal function as much as it is an external function. I guess really what we're looking at doing is almost sort of understanding within your enterprise, and one of the resource sheets that I've included along with some templates kind of says, you know, what is your enterprise trying to achieve? Is it just trying to achieve more customers, more footfall? Are you trying to get a message out there in terms of your growth? Obviously, a lot of messaging at the moment is quite challenging for people because, you know, we went into lockdown, businesses closed, staff were furloughed, then we're open again, but we're working remotely from home, then we're back in the office. Now, many of us are, you know, back in lockdown and maybe much more restricted about moving. And keeping all of our customers informed about all of those changes can be really quite chaotic. So one of the things that can be difficult is overloading on social media. So I would say that we have different organisations and different customer needs in terms of how much information is put out and at kind of what times of the day. So it certainly used to be that social media was really, really good if you put out early breakfast tweets. So if you think about commuting time, when people were on the train, if you have commuted into work, you'll often see people are on their phones and going through their social media at that point. So that was always a good time to catch people on social media. But now that's changed with people working from home. There is less of commuter time, and actually an awful lot of people have got flexible working, and so maybe actually they're looking at their phones or catching up on things maybe more at 10 o'clock rather than at sort of 7:30, 8 o'clock on the commute trail. So we need to think about and be considerate of our customers and when they are available to look at our social media, and then how much social media we put out there, because if we overload people, they switch off. And one of the things that I would say is that social media is only part of a much wider context of business information that you put out there. So it is important that you are using your social media. However, it's not the holy grail in its own right. It needs to be part of an integrated approach to how you put all of that information about your enterprise out. So some of it could be print, some of it could be website, some of it could be social media, some of it could be newsletter, some of it is very much about direct emails and phone calls to people, and keeping that connection that actually means that you're building relationships with your stakeholders and with your customers. One of the other things that is really interesting often, I find, is that people will say, I'm quite comfortable with Facebook because I have a personal Facebook account. So I put everything out on Facebook for our business. If your customers or your stakeholders are not using Facebook at that level, then you're not meeting their needs. So it's a really interesting short piece of analysis perhaps for you to do as a sort of takeaway project, is to look at the main social media platforms that you use and the main ones that your customers or your different stakeholder groups use. So it's difficult if you are putting, let's say, 80% of your time into Facebook posts, when actually most of your customers, if you produce something that's perhaps a product, that they're using Instagram. So we need to look at making sure that we are using what can often be very limited resources that we have within our businesses to be using the social media platforms that are resonant to our customer groups and our stakeholder groups. Does that make sense to people? Yeah. So if your customers are really, really on Twitter, and you can connect with them on Twitter, then use Twitter. Make sure you kind of investing your time proportionately across the right social media platforms that will make those connections with your stakeholder and your customer groups. Is that okay? Make sense? Okay. Thank you, Emily. Nice nod from Emily there. Perfect. So really, what I would certainly encourage you to do is, if you are responsible and interested in your social media for your enterprise, and obviously hence being here today, is that we take a little bit of time to look at what's your why, what is your enterprise doing, what are your products, what are your services, what is that sort of language and tone, what are you trying to achieve through your business. So that's your why, if you like. Presumably, there will be some sort of business plan that you have for your business, or that you have access to within your business, if you're not directly responsible for that in terms of leaders, owners of businesses. In theory, then you have a marketing strategy that will support achieving that business plan. And then out of the marketing strategy, a part of that would be your social media strategy. But all of those things, we've got the arrows on the bottom of this screen, they are all evolving elements of running a business. No business can stand still, and we've seen that more than anything over the last 6 months or so. We have to review things, we have to look at where we adapt. We do need to look at innovations, because marketplaces move on, new platforms move on, etc. But having something to measure, which kind of fits back into, Amani, your question about sort of analytics. I would say analytics are important, so for your website perhaps, or your Twitter reach, but it's the measures that you have within your enterprise which are important. So when you are doing anything within your business, and I'm sure many of you have commissioned projects that you work with, is it that you actually have an understanding of the outputs that are required from that project? Do you have an understanding of the outputs that you require from your social media? Are you looking at numbers of likes? To me, I would say likes are important, and they make us feel good. We go, oh, we've got 10,000 likes on our Facebook page, or we've got 2,500 followers on our Twitter account, etc. But they won't all necessarily be people that are directly resonant to your customer group or your stakeholder groups. So just a degree of caution there. It's a great thing to have people like and retweet, etc. I know that on my certainly on my sort of Twitter and the like, I obviously can't really sort of dictate who follows me. I could block people, but I don't like doing that unless there is a very specific reason to do that. So I'm quite open about who follows me and try and engage with them. But at the end of the day, if they are a car mechanic in Minnesota, they're perhaps not really going to be sort of somebody that's within my profile, if you like, of customer group. So that's great, but I wouldn't count my 1,000 followers or my 10,000 followers. There's going to be a percentage of them that really are about engagement within your social media. So not to dismiss numbers of likes, numbers of followers, etc. But do treat them with an element of caution, because you filter down and actually you'll find Pareto's law, 80-20, that you're probably engaging with about 20% of the people that perhaps follow you, etc. But look at the measures that you want to put in place. Is it about reach? Is it about call to action? Is it about converting people from a social media post onto a web page that you've set up, and then actually people using the information on the web page to engage with you directly? Okay. The one thing that I would say is that, particular to social media is not about monologue. It's about trying to create dialogue. It's that engagement and that relationship building. It's another tool in your armory to relationship building, to driving people to the right places, as I say, perhaps on your website, or to call your organisation, or to a particular project or a service that you're delivering. It's not going to actually, it's part of a complement of what you can do and how you can communicate with organisations. So to me, understanding those measures, they don't have to be all analytics based, but I think it's really important that we look at some of those measures and take those on board. Okay. So there are a number of different types of marketing activity that we can do on social media. So I've listed a few down here on this particular slide. So I guess really they're reminders for you. I'm quite happy for this slide pack to be included in the follow-up email as well. So are you actually putting social media and communications out which are about your organisation? And I've put there, you know, who you are and what you do. It sounds quite basic, but if you are a marketing expert, if I don't tell you that I also do events management, you'll only think of me as a marketing expert. So looking at whole organisation and reminding people about who you are and what you do is really, really important. So always kind of going back to those little kind of top-up sound bites, if you like, about your organisation. Values-based marketing, you'll see that over the recent COVID situation, so many more organisations, whether it's on social media or even on TV, have gone back to looking at values-based marketing. So this is, if you look at even a McDonald's ad from a few years ago, they used to do very much product-based marketing. You know, here's your Big Mac, you can buy it for 99p kind of thing. And then they started mixing in more values-based marketing, which was more when you buy your 99p Big Mac, actually some of the money that goes to that goes to the Ronald McDonald Foundations, which are about helping families stay together in some of their Ronald McDonald houses when particularly children perhaps have health challenges or are life limited. So that's the kind of the values-based piece, sort of why you do, who your customer of benefit are, and how you go about delivering your service. And I think particularly as health and well-being, there is a really, really strong values message that we can share there. So project-wise, you might have a new project, it might be a new mental health service that you have to deliver. So you're kind of saying, we've got this mental health project, this is what it will do for you, this is how it will benefit you, this is how you get in contact with us. If it's a product, it might be, we have a yoga class that you can do at your desk, and it's at 10 o'clock and it's going to cost you £5 to join, and here's how you join in on that. Stakeholders are very much about who supports you. So this could be referral partners as well. They are very, very important. It could be commissioners of service, it could be grant givers, and all too often we need to make sure that we say thank you to those people. And recognise them for the value that they give, often in funding a project or working with us, so that through collaboration we can actually achieve more than we can often achieve by ourselves. Lifestyle, this kind of goes into particularly perhaps a lot of retail marketing goes around lifestyle. So if you think of classic car marketing on TV, it's like, oh, you know, you could be driving this car and living this life, living this dream. Holidays are often marketed on that basis. And then the aspirational side is, I want that to be me. Within the health and well-being sector, it could often be that the aspirational piece is, I'm really struggling at the moment and I want this to be me. I want to know that there is a pathway to changing my life, being able to take more control and achieve a more balanced sort of life opportunities for ourselves. And the impact side, telling your transformational story, that's a quick example. I was working with a client in West Birmingham a few years ago, and it was actually through a tender opportunity that they were responding to. And we were looking at the evidence of what they do on sort of current projects that they were running to support their ability and their competence and to deliver this new project. So I was challenging them around where's your evidence? You know, well, we've got all these spreadsheets and sort of sign-up sheets, and there was one about healthy lifestyles. And this, we were talking about it, and I was going, well, it basically says you met this person at the supermarket entrance, and this was their name and their contact details. Weight management, they came along and they did an assessment. Their weight was this, their BMI was this. 6 weeks later, because they'd joined the course, they'd lost X amount of weight. 12 weeks later, which was sort of the milestone goals around payment by results, they'd got down to a much lower weight than they anticipated. Now, that's all about outputs. Because we were talking about it in the office of this particular client, somebody else piped up and went, oh, is that an abstract name, Jean? Yes, she was amazing, because do you know that actually when she lost all of that weight, she gained confidence, she started cooking with her children, she felt better health-wise, so she was going out and playing with her children. She had really limited her life into being in-house because she was so conscious and lacking confidence because of her weight issues. So she started changing this. She then actually felt as though she could go, and she started volunteering, and then she got a job. So all of a sudden you go, that's not just about the metrics of losing weight for that individual, that's a great output for that particular project, but the transformational impact for that woman, Jean, as we'll call her, was actually that she started engaging with her children. She was much more confident, the healthy lifestyle, the healthy eating. She was breaking that cycle in terms of passing on sort of nutrition habits to her children. And then, as I say, the volunteering, getting out more, and then actually getting a job. That's an incredible transformation. And we need to look at how we capture that information within our organisations before we can then start perhaps using some of that appropriately with permission in any of our social media and our case studies that might go on our websites, etc. Is that a useful capture and reminder? So what I'd like to do very, very quickly, if I can stop the screen sharing and pop you into a breakout room, is just spend a few minutes within your breakout room. Perhaps if you can find the last tweet or the last Facebook post that your organisation put out, and then think about who was it for. Was it for your customer? Was it for a stakeholder? Was it more about internal? Was it about a product? Was it about a project that you'd regained? And maybe sort of what that marketing style was. Was it sort of inspirational? Was it really just sort of, you know, product, come in, buy this, attend session, etc.? Is that okay? So just literally 5 minutes, just have a little look and a chat, and just sort of consider as I say, how the last Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, they're probably the 3 easiest ones to have a look at, and just have a very short chat amongst yourselves about that. Is that okay? Is everybody all right with that? Lovely. Right, I'm going to stop share and breakout rooms. Ooh, I'm not sure whether I've done this correctly. I haven't used breakout rooms before, so you're going to have to excuse me. 1, 2, 3. So there's 3 people in a couple of the rooms, and then there are 2 people in another room. So just popping you in now. Okay. Has everybody got a breakout room? Hi there, everyone.
Hi.
How did you get on with that?
Yeah, that was really good. Yeah, am I the only one that's come back? Or,
No, we've got Tiana back with us.
sorry,
So
I
the other
only
rooms
see.
hopefully will be closing in just a moment. So
Oh, okay. I thought we were having a conversation and we had to quickly just cut it short. But
okay, well, we can carry on those conversations. So how did you get on with that? You two worked together.
yeah, it was good to get Tiana's perspective.
Okay. And sort of quite useful in terms of just literally looking at the last tweet that your organisation sent out, or the last Facebook post, and going, well, who was that aimed
Yeah.
at? And what was the language like, kind of thing. Yeah? How did everybody else get on?
Okay, I think I think we did a bit of an introduction, and then
Okay, that's good.
and then it was already a point to come back, so we kind of rushed through our last post.
That's okay. That's okay. But I think, I mean, even doing that exercise sort of later on, and just kind of going back through your own organisations, kind of not to be overly critical about it, but just have that mindfulness about, well, who was that actually aimed at? What did we really want them to do as a result of that tweet or that Facebook post, etc.? And was the language kind of right? You know, could it have been a little bit more resonant? And we will have a look at sort of rewriting and that kind of thing as we go through a couple of the other exercises. Anybody else kind of want to contribute anything at the moment? We're all good and just sort of found that quite an interesting, nice little breakout as well. Different voice to listen to rather than mine for an hour and a half. Okay, so if we're all right, I'm just going to go back to screen sharing, and we'll kind of like move into the second section where we talk a little bit more about the different platforms and how to use them. So that was where we were just a moment ago. So we're going to talk now really about sort of the jigsaw puzzle, as I call it, of social media. So there are loads of social media platforms out there, and I think it's really important that we are aware of them, but equally if we think, oh, well, I must set up a Pinterest account, and I must have a Snapchat and an Instagram and a Facebook and a Twitter, etc. If you set those up with a view to actually using them, which is obviously a little bit different to, do I need to sort of get the name, the organisational name kind of registered, if you like, hold it into your account and have it dormant. But if you're going to use them, that's a lot of time that could be taken up in a day. Organisations sort of that we have with us today, can you put your hand up? Do you have a dedicated marketing person within the organisation? Or is it just sort of part of somebody else's role? Who has a dedicated marketing person? Amani, you do. Okay, anybody else? I'm gonna go down my... Yeah, Emily, you are a marketer, and Charlotte as well. Okay. But for many of the rest of you, is marketing sort of something that's kind of being added into an existing job role, and perhaps is something that you're not overly familiar with? Hi, Davey, you very kindly put your hand up, and Drew. Okay, so if it's being added into a job role as opposed to having a designated role, if I use an example for one of my clients, they have a personal Facebook page, which means you have friends, and they have a business Facebook page, which means you have likes. Now, they started off because they launched their business sort of under their personal Facebook page, and then they realised that they could have a business page, and the business page has more functionality to it, things like being able to schedule events and post jobs and various other things. But they still haven't fully migrated everybody from their personal page across to their business page. Then they've got a Twitter account, but they've opened up a couple of Twitter accounts because of long-term projects, maybe 3-year funded projects. So they then kind of have a main Twitter account and 2 others. Then they've got an Instagram account, because that's very much a growing platform, particularly for millennials. If you're working with young people, they're more likely to be on Instagram now than they are even on Facebook. Then they've got, they manage sort of internal comms on WhatsApp, but they also have some WhatsApp groups in terms of cohorts. Then they've got a LinkedIn account, and they've obviously got their website. And I think they might actually have 2 other dormant sort of Facebook accounts, which are for businesses that have slowly been declined and are trying to merge into their main group. So they almost have 9 different social media accounts. So if you just think, oh, I'll pop a tweet up about our new project, you kind of think, oh, then I've got to put it on all the Facebook accounts, then I've got to put it on the Twitter account, but actually there's 3 Twitter accounts, then I've got to put something up on Instagram. That needs a different format than Facebook or Twitter perhaps. Then I've got to write something on the webpage. Suddenly, and I don't know whether the marketing sort of designated people here will agree, even writing a tweet is not just something that you can always just knock out in a minute or 2. It takes a lot of thought, because we have those limitations around 140 characters and trying to make it a strong message, etc. But then if you think you've got to perhaps do it across 9 different or 4 different social media accounts, it takes a chunk of time. Would anybody, people like Emily, you said that you're a marketing person within your organisation, would you agree with that?
I'm not anymore, but I was.
Okay.
But yeah, I would agree with that. And I went into it with kind of not very much experience at all about tweeting or anything. So it's the time that it takes to phrase what you want to say, and make sure that it's inclusive and appropriate and everything else. So
yeah. And I think that's really relevant. As I say, it's got to be thoughtful, and that kind of goes back to, I think, Amani, when you were talking about, you know, sort of language, etc. At the very beginning, is we have to we can't just sort of knock something out. And the worst thing, which does happen, you know, none of us are absolutely perfect, but you know, you realise then I've put that out, and oh, I mistyped something because I was doing it quickly, and then of course it takes much longer because you have to go back and you have to take it down, and then you've got to retype it and then put it back out again, and that kind of thing. So you know, let's accept for a moment, we all do our best and we all want to have, you know, high and positive professional standards, but we are also human, and particularly if we are not overly comfortable about, you know, how do we sort of put a tweet together to be resonant for an audience, or we're trying to do it in the middle of I'm being asked for a report on something else, but I know I've got to pop something up onto our social media. So be thoughtful and mindful. Try and take that time to do the really simple things like check spelling. So one of the things that I do find, though, is that people often are, well, oh, what's the difference between Twitter as a platform, if you like, and Facebook as a platform? So I love, personally, I do love donuts, I have to say that, but I like this social media donut. And if you do a Google search, there's a couple of different ones. So this just very, very briefly, sort of taking the example of eating a donut, gives you a very brief illustration about how you might use that particular platform to post out about the fact that you like donuts or you're eating a donut. So things like Snapchat are perhaps not overly relevant within businesses. They're more of Snapchat's more of a social communication, but it's still a very mainstream platform. But things like Instagram is very, very much visually based, more so than Twitter even, or LinkedIn, for example. So with Instagram, you absolutely want a picture, and Instagram tends to use square format pictures. You can kind of modify them a little bit. And then you also hear people talking about being a fan of the grid, because Instagram has a function where with your images, you can kind of put the 9 images into a grid and use that. But things like Twitter, we're starting to look now at how we would include the tag in an organisation or a place that you are, for example, eating your donut. So it's got Sunken Donut. So you would look and see if they have a Twitter account of themselves. They'll have the little computer @ sign. And then what we would want to do on Twitter is include that in our social media posts. So we want to use tags and hashtags, either for people or for places. That's the way that people actually get noticed within their notifications on their accounts. So you may think, if you've put a Twitter account out, or Facebook or anything like that, you put it out, that's fine, haven't had any response. If you haven't tagged people in, either the people that you want to draw attention to it, or the people that you want to thank, or the people that you're working with, and from an engagement perspective or location, etc., then the likelihood is it's right down the bottom of their feed for the day, because we all know that if we go through our Twitter feed, just as one example, we can scroll and scroll and scroll. So the way to make sure that people do notice you would be, if I was putting out let's say with iSE we have a food bank, if that's the best example. So what I would want to do is to be saying to people, we have a food bank at the Women's Enterprise Hub. So we're tagging the Women's Enterprise Hub in so that they know that they've got, they've been mentioned in something. If it's, for example, we've just had a great donation from individuals or particularly from an organisation. So we would want to find the organisation, find their Twitter account, their little sort of computer @ letter, and make sure that we include them in that tag by way of saying thank you so much for the donation. And we would want to put a really nice picture of their donation up on our tweet that we're putting out. So things like images are really, really important in any of our social media. So it's almost now irrelevant to put a social media post out without some kind of visual content as well. So again, that's really important when we need to think about what type of images we're using that go along with the language that work within a particular social media platform. Say Instagram, very, very visual social media platform. But even on, as I say, sort of Facebook and Twitter. So we're probably Instagram, Facebook and Twitter are the three main social media platforms that you probably want to be looking at for your business. On top of that, we have LinkedIn, which is the professional networking sort of platform. Has anybody got a LinkedIn account, or is it, hands up if you're familiar with LinkedIn? So most people know of LinkedIn. Keep your hand up if you actively use your LinkedIn account. Davey, excellent, lovely. Because it is one of those accounts that can often get sort of a little bit left behind. But it is a really important platform to be using, much more so on the sort of business to business side of things. Is everybody comfortable with the term business to business rather than business to customer? Yes, okay, so LinkedIn, very much business to business, whereas you might be using Twitter, particularly Instagram, for more of a business to customer, business to consumer kind of platform. Has anybody got any other social media accounts that they are using either actively within their enterprise that maybe, I don't know whether perhaps Pinterest, that was a platform that was quite relevant a couple of years ago, but we hear a little bit less of now. Yes, Kami.
We use quite a lot of YouTube as well, like
yeah,
videos.
Yeah. Okay, and I would absolutely say, so YouTube, certainly in terms of storing videos, etc., a little bit harder in terms, I think of YouTube as sort of a resource platform almost, rather than perhaps a communication platform. But you're quite right, YouTube is really, really valuable. And I know that one of the things that iSE has been doing is really building up the content on their YouTube channel, because it is really important. What we would then want to do, so for example, if this video is up onto the iSE YouTube channel, we would then copy the link for this particular video. We would use a link shortener, so something like bit.ly, B-I-T-L-Y. So always use your link shorteners for particularly your Twitter, because obviously your link might be 30 characters long already, and we want to try and get that down to 5 or 7 characters in terms of that character count that applies to Twitter. So use your link shortener, something like bit.ly. And then what you would want to do is include that in your tweet or your Facebook post, because you can't hyperlink the copy like you can in an email, for example. One of the downsides of Instagram is that other than the link in your bio, your biography at the very top of your Instagram page, even if you mention or include a link in the main content of a post on Instagram, it doesn't hyperlink. And that, I think, whether they will look at changing that, it would be super helpful if they did. So Instagram is great in terms of hashtags, but it's not very good at picking up specific links to individual content within an individual post. So that's where if you look through Instagram posts, you'll see an awful lot of people go link in bio. And then you go back on up to the top of their page where their company information is, where enterprise information is, and they might have changed that link if they want to be particularly promoting a new project, for example. Hashtags are a growing importance and growing relevance, and that's really about beginning to build your tribe, or find your tribe, as a lot of people would talk about. So I work a lot in the social enterprise sector, so I follow the hashtag SOCENT. So the hashtag is the 2 sort of sloping lines and then the 2 horizontal lines in terms of symbols. And hashtags are really important if you want to follow certain topics. So hashtags don't allow you to follow an individual organisation in their own right. You need to use the computer @ sign for that. But hashtags do allow you to link into, sorry to use that pun, but to connect with certain topics of conversation. So as I say, I follow a SOCENT sort of hashtag and social enterprise and various other ones. So using hashtags within your posts, whether it is now Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, etc., and LinkedIn, is really important. Sometimes we might create our own hashtag, and that might be relevant to a particular project that we're using. So at the moment, the Women's Enterprise Hub has got a hashtag of Let's Keep Talking, because that's relevant to a couple of different new projects, the community-based projects that they have funded. But that needs to grow traction in terms of that particular hashtag. But ones which are out there, which usually, if you're writing in on your post, as soon as you start writing, as soon as I start writing social enterprise, if I've used my hashtag, the options kind of come up, and then you can see how many people are actually following and how many people are actually posting with that hashtag. So that begins to give you an idea of the popularity that you might be able to plug into for a particular hashtag. So is everybody okay, the difference between the sort of links, the @ sign in terms of tagging in an organisation so that a notification comes up in their account that they've been tagged into something, and hashtags? Yeah. Now, the one thing I would say is that obviously, if we see something in our notifications that somebody has tagged us in, this may sound quite obvious, but reply, engage, because that's what we are trying to do with our social media, is engage people, inform them, but inform them with things which are relevant to them. So I would only tag somebody into a post that I feel is relevant to them. It could be that you are using the @ sign to tag in an organisation that you want to share your post because it's relevant to their audience as well. As I say, it could be a thanking somebody, so don't just say thank you Sally Ryan for your donation to our food bank today, because I won't get that notification. It will disappear into the history of it. But if you use my @Sally Ryan, then it will come up in my notifications, and I can then engage and go, oh, you're very welcome. You know, I look forward to, you know, hearing the success of the food bank, or I'll, you know, look forward to being able to donate again next week. And then people begin to see that conversation. So please, 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 if somebody has tagged you into something or liked something that you've done, try and actually use that dialogue rather than monologue. Okay. So that's a little summary. I do like a bit of a quote. I don't know if anybody's watched The Legend of Bagger Vance, but he was a golfer. And really, this quote that's within the film, you've got a choice. You can either stop or you can start. And it is absolutely true. If you are not using your social media platforms to communicate with your audience and with your customers and with your market, then be absolutely sure that your competitors will be doing that. But go back to that capacity and resource. How much time can you allocate and be reasonable and impactful with the time that you have available? And if you, as an organization, don't have somebody with the skills, then there are lots and lots of really, really good sort of social media sort of short soundbite sort of workshops that can go into more detail than we have time to do today. Obviously, if you contacted myself or iSE, then they have a lot of information to hand there as well that they could perhaps provide additional support for you. But if it is very much a case of you don't have the resources, the capability, the staff time, or confidence, then it may be something that as an organisation you perhaps need to consider whether or not to outsource that. What I would say is have an understanding of what you are outsourcing so that you still have control over what your social media messaging is, which platforms you're using, what you're asking somebody to do on your behalf of your organisation. Because at the end of the day, it's still your business. So that's really, really important in terms of having confidence about the messaging that's going out with your name around it. But it's also about knowing your market. So whenever we're looking at our social media platforms, again, we're going back to that piece where if we want to connect with our market, are we actually using the right social media platforms where our customers, our audience is actually using themselves, exploring, and understanding that audiences change. So as we said with COVID, there's an awful lot of organisations and individuals who are actually just sort of getting digitally zoomed out because they are overloaded. So really thinking about and having that sensitivity around, do I need to send this post out? Am I just adding to clutter and white noise? Have I really thought about the content, the relevance, and that call to action for that social media post that you're putting out? Does it have sort of an authenticity about why you are putting the post out and what you are saying? And I think keeping it real is really, really important. So it goes back to your values as an organisation. It goes back to your business plan, your purpose of what you do and how you do it. And be able to create that sort of resonance with your audience in terms of how you speak to them and the information that you put out. Don't overload people, because you can actually switch people off as much as you're trying to switch them on in terms of your social media posts. Does that sort of make sense as well? Does anybody perhaps had any experience, either personally, they've sort of thought, God, you know, I'm just endlessly getting posts from that picture, I'm going to kind of mute it for a moment, or anybody had any sort of feedback from customers or within their own organisation, that sort of conversation? No? Okay, let's move on to the next slide. one of the things which is a bit of a myth buster is, I've got, I mentioned it a little bit before, referred to it. I've got X number of followers. So and somebody, I don't know, 30 people have said they're going to come and attend this Zoom session today. Because they've said they're going to go, or because they've liked it, doesn't mean they're actually going to turn up. They're not a booked, committed sort of attendee. If we put it out as an event, come along to the social media workshop, just because they've said they're going doesn't mean they're actually going to turn up. So it gives you a bit of a feel for the level of interest, but don't take it as absolute that they're all going to turn up. And I know that we've certainly had some customers that have sort of said, oh, but 50 people were going to come to my wellbeing retreat today, but only 2 people came along. It's just like, your social media is about raising awareness. It's about encouraging people to engage with you. It's about giving them more information about events. But at the end of the day, they need to go somewhere. They need to probably go to a website, to an event booking page, or to a project which explains in a lot more detail than obviously a tweet can, what the project is about, how they can engage, what benefits they will gain, etc. So your social media is about integrating. And all too often what we can do is see something and we retweet it out, or we post something on Twitter, but we don't necessarily put it on our website. Or on Facebook, and we need to integrate that. I would say that if you have a report that's within the health and wellbeing sector that you think is of interest, that's great to retweet it out, and we can do that as a very quick response. But it is much better and it has much more value if you can retweet it with your own commentary. So a note to say, this is a really good report, particularly liked this bit, or thought that was a really good thing, or see our response to this report. If it's let's say a mental health report around COVID and wellbeing at the moment, it might be that you actually want to then write a blog on your website. So do that bit of thought leadership, what we actually think about this, what our response is, what we are going to be doing about it. Within our own business, and then retweet it with that bit.ly link, so that then people are beginning to see your view, your opinion. It adds a richness and a depth to your response, rather than just a quick retweet and people go, what was that about, why are they retweeting it? So it's really important to sort of add your own commentary where you can, and that again begins to actually build people's interest in what you as an independent organisation are doing. So does that help people? Is there a sort of a tendency perhaps for some of the organisations to just sort of gunfire, rapid fire sort of retweet things out without thought about why they're doing it, or what the impact is, what their own views and opinions might be about something topic? Davey, you were nodding there a little bit. So that's something you've experienced.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I've kind of tended to do it myself on occasion. Just seen something and I quite like it, but for whatever reason, I haven't actually specified. I haven't actually said why I like it.
Yeah. Okay.
And then just retweeted it, or that's what it's, or shared it, or whatever. And and I, in a sense, but I haven't become part of the conversation.
Yeah. Okay. And we all do that. So let's accept our human nature. But perhaps that's one thing that I would say as you're going about doing more social media marketing, is think, rather than flicking a quick retweet, is think, can I add just that little bit of commentary? Is it something actually I want to do a more in-depth, sort of, if it was an interesting report, is it something I want to do a more in-depth read and response to? In which case, as I say, perhaps do the blog, if you've got control of your website page, and then kind of link it back into your response that you put out. And then make sure, if you see something really good on LinkedIn, for example, it's very, very easy. You just, you know, flick a retweet or a repost through that particular social media platform. Actually, maybe it's something that you need or want to pick up and put across your other social media platforms. So it's very easy to just kind of stay in your one marketing channel, whereas in actual fact, it might have value across your other channels. And particularly if it's a good report that you come across on LinkedIn and you've got 200 people that you're connected on LinkedIn, you might have 2,500 on your Twitter account, and maybe some of them would actually like to hear about the report or your response or how you feel that it's impacted. So use your social media to do that sort of cross communication piece. Okay. LinkedIn is a really, really good social media platform that does kind of get a little bit left out sometimes. So the one really good thing about LinkedIn is that you can actually join forums which might have particular relevance and resonance with you. So do have a look at LinkedIn. It can be quite detailed. You can get some really, really good stats because you get to see sort of your reach, how many people you're connected, who's looking at your profile, how many people are within different forums and contributing. The one thing that can be a little bit frustrating with LinkedIn is that people do often choose to keep their profile private or locked. So, for example, on my LinkedIn account, I get a notification that somebody's looked at my profile. So I pop on out of interest to kind of go, oh, is it somebody new? Is it that they then sent me a connection request? Is it somebody that I know? In which case I wonder what it was that I've just put out or what may have prompted them to sort of do that view. And you get, I think within the free sort of LinkedIn as opposed to the premium that you pay for, you can see the last 5 people that have viewed your account or your profile. And then you find that 3 of them are on private. Now that's personal choice, absolutely. You can change that setting on and off as you may wish. A lot of recruiters will actually keep their account private so that you don't necessarily see if a recruiter is looking. But it is quite useful to see who you're connecting with. And then maybe I would never immediately that somebody has followed you on any social media platform assume that that is some kind of sale. And I know a lot of people, particularly on LinkedIn, as soon as they've sent a connection request and somebody's accepted it, they're sort of straight in with a, right, now I want you to buy my social media marketing workshop class and it's going to cost you £500 to attend kind of thing. And I'm just kind of like, oh, hang on a minute. So you've just connected with me to push a sell right in my face, and be very, very mindful that that can turn people off. So usually, again, it's I try and take the approach of I can give something first, and as you give and you get to know people and you build that relationship, at some point, you know, things do sort of come around and people might go, oh, you're the person that does a lot around marketing in the social enterprise sector, aren't you? Could we have a chat? And that's a much more comfortable way for me personally to manage my LinkedIn profile and my LinkedIn engagement. But it is a really, really good platform for that business to business side of getting to know people, and join the forums, look at them, read them, contribute to them, and you build that reputation. And one of the things that you obviously can do with your LinkedIn profile is if you put that you are a project officer with a particular organisation, then people get to know that you are linked to that organisation. So generally speaking, social media is great at spreading the word. It's great at getting broad messages out there. You can sort of filter down. So if we go back to that thinking of, we can tell people about our enterprise, we can tell them about the projects we run, we can tell them about the products or the services that we have, but we can also say, oh, we've just done a really good case study about one of our projects. The case study is here on our webpage, and here's the link. Here's a short profile piece on our social media, but use the link, go and actually look at the more detailed, the more rich content that we might have. So that interlinking is really, really important. Any individual that works within your business, if you can, and if they are happy, if permission based, it's great if they will obviously link accounts. So as a Facebook person, you can link your account into a Facebook business page, but that's purely individual responsibility to consider whether that's appropriate and okay, comfortable with them. I don't think you can expect staff members to automatically sort of link their own personal accounts on social media into a business account on social media. But what our social media does, particularly through the hashtag and the tagging people in, is it helps us develop our community. And within our community, it also can be a really great way when you've got things like polls and voting options, particularly on things like business Facebook pages, that you can actually get little sort of short surveys, quick surveys about, you know, sort of people's level of interest on something, their engagement, whether they think something is useful, relevant, you know, which way it will go. A lot of people use it for if they're doing brand redevelopment, so you're changing your logo. They'll kind of maybe put up, you know, 3 or 4 options on a social media platform and ask people to kind of vote on which one they prefer best. And that's kind of like really good way of doing a very, very quick bit of sort of market research or sort of brand research or ask for an opinion or a vote on something. And one of the things that we can do through our social media is really sort of personalise our offer. So again, by using that sort of tagging and the hashtags, using the imagery, making sure our imagery is impactful, so that it adds to the message and the tone that we are using. One of the things that I would say with social media is to be mindful that with the language of social media is if you were doing a tender or a grant application and you knew that the commissioner of that service used the word service user, you may not be comfortable with that within your own enterprise setting. However, to give that resonance, mirror the language. So if I talk about clients and I have a client that talks about customers, I'm more likely to reflect their language, as long as it is appropriate, obviously. But that way you kind of build that a little bit of connection, that little bit of comfort. So that's what really social media is doing an awful lot of, is about giving that confidence, giving that comfort, starting that connection point with organisations. And it is a massively great way of keeping people up to date, you know, if you've got that new product, that new service, what it is, who it's for, how they can kind of connect with it. So social media is really, really good, but we do need to include that call to action in our social media often, as I say, whether it's a link or whether it's a phone number or a new project. So very quickly, I'm hoping that I can do the breakout rooms again. How exciting. I won't necessarily assign you into the same breakout rooms. But I think with some of the things that we've kind of talked about, where we've kind of honed in on a different use of social media platforms, and also the different way in which we can use language or images. Images is obviously a little bit harder in this particular breakout group, but just have it in the back of your minds. So it'd be really great if you could go back to your social media post that you looked at last time, and just within your groups kind of maybe a little bit of a sounding board about how you would reframe that particular post, either changing the language, maybe changing the social media platform that you would use, maybe sort of thinking, or actually that really didn't kind of come across particularly well, because what I wanted to do was thank a referral partner or a commissioner. So just sort of look at how you would rewrite it for either a different audience or put it onto a different social media platform, and just have a little bit of a chat and a review, if you like, of what we've talked about. Is that okay with everybody? Happy to do that? Sorry, Charlotte, did you put your hand up? Was that a question hand or was that an okay hand?
No, sorry, I was just moving my laptop.
That's absolutely fine. Okay, so I'm just going to stop share there. Do the breakout rooms. I think actually you're probably all going to go into the same breakout rooms. Yeah. Okay, you should be all going into different rooms. Perfect. Hello, welcome back. How was that within each of your groups? Kind of going back to that post that we sort of first looked at and thinking, oh, did it hit the right messages? What would I change? What would I add in? Would I put it, you know, different messaging on a different social media platform? Would anybody like to feedback a bit on that?
I think it was very helpful. I think in hindsight, all of us mentioned things that we could have done differently, but I specifically mentioned that it maybe would have been more appropriate for me to have put the post on a different platform. And then the post that I had included wording, and I think instead of the picture, the post including wording, I think I could have put that in the caption and then had a picture of something else. Okay. And I think that maybe would have increased engagement.
Lovely. So, okay, it's really positive, constructive reflection there, Drew. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? I think one of the things that we need to be mindful of in terms of social media and content kind of creation that we've just sort of very briefly covered is that at the moment, you know, the trend is very, very much around creative content and being very content rich. So it's less about going, I've got this product, please buy it. It's more about look at these people, look what's happening, you know, they've gone through to the park and they're walking down the street, they're smiling, they're happy, and actually that's as a result of improved well-being, and that came from the services that we've provided type thing. There's a lot more of a move to simple kind of flat graphics if we're doing sort of messaging rather than lots of very complicated content and wording that people can't really sort of view in an image on a social media post. So, you know, sort of short, clear statements, and then, you know, in the description of the post, kind of give a bit more detail, and then, you know, move them to wherever there is sort of content detail, connection, contact points, that kind of thing. There is definitely a move towards video content. So animated, so Instagram, if any of you are Instagram users, you know, the fact that you can edit your photos and you can put sort of arrows on that kind of, you know, will spin round and kind of focus back into maybe a point of contact, a tagged individual, or a part of the image that you want to draw people's attention to. And certainly if we are looking at customers that are within that Generation Z, millennials, they are much more interested and much more attuned to kind of dynamic content, so video content, animated content, that kind of thing. So we do need to use and be mindful of different types of content, again, to resonate with our different audience. Would you use a whizzy arrow and a flashing starburst on an Instagram post if you were actually trying to send a communication out to a commissioner of service in the sense of, thank you very much, you know, this has been really great, here's our end closing project report kind of thing for this commissioner? Maybe you'd have to be a little bit mindful as to whether that was appropriate for that particular commissioner, depending on the, you know, the type of service, etc. You might want something a little bit more formal language, business language kind of thing. Whereas if you're looking to attract young people, 14, 16, early 20s, you perhaps want to use a slightly more relaxed language, still appropriate, but also use something that's a bit more sort of eye-catching in terms of sort of dynamic content. So that's a kind of something perhaps to consider. Okay, there are lots of on Instagram and on Facebook, and less so on Twitter. You can do sort of multiple images, so you can almost do like a flick book through on your images, and that can be useful if you can't get everything into
a single image, use that multiple image function that you have on some of those social media platforms and tell a story that way. There's a chap called Stephen Bartlett who is the CEO of Social Chain. He's actually American. He does that superbly well, really, really well. So he's well worth a follow on social media. Okay. So we're sort of down to the last half an hour of our session time. So I'm just going to quickly go back to screen sharing, if that's okay. And we're just going to pop into the final section of our sort of chat. And this section is really about sort of, say, let's change the world. So it's kind of about getting that big global message out there. We've got different platforms do have appeals to different audiences. And I think this is particularly relevant if you are trying to attract a business to customer audience through your social media communications, but it does also reflect on a business to business. Business to business is almost easier to do social media marketing. Because you can do that direct tag into an organisation and you can draw their attention to what you want to say, what you're sharing with them. Business to customer is a bit, obviously, you know, much more broad, and you're not quite sure who's picking up on that message often. That's where you can go into any of your accounts, social media accounts, Facebook or Twitter, etc. will have, if you go into settings, it will show you and it will send you captures of what your activity has been, how many opens you've had, what your reach would be, etc. So if that is important to you, and I know, Amani, you mentioned that earlier in the beginning of the session today, then do go in and look. But that's your responsibility for each of us to actually go in and go, that campaign that I've put out, how does that look? You know, has that sort of increased my numbers of followers, my numbers of likes, my connections, the number of people who opened it? Is it the most popular tweet? So being able to look back and say, your most popular tweets of, you know, this month were these two, or the most engagement was this one, begins to give you, you can trend that and begin to sort of get a feel for what works with your audience, and where you're getting the most sort of comments and likes and reshares and that kind of thing. So do go into your settings, familiarise yourself with those so that you can actually use them a little bit better, and start looking at what that kind of trend is. As I say, Instagram at the moment is probably one of the platforms that's really on a growth platform and very, very much around our younger people audience. If you are looking at engaging perhaps an older demographic, then probably something like Facebook is going to be a little bit more appropriate and comfortable for that particular audience. If you are working with customers who fall into perhaps that sort of elders, just bear in mind that they may well not be on social media. You might have to go back to your marketing strategy, of which your social media strategy is a small part, and actually look at printed materials. And again, if you are business to customer, if you work in a locality, it may be that you've got to go back to printed materials, and getting those placed into coffee shops, libraries, health centres, etc., community centres where your potential customers may be visiting and using. I appreciate we've got the COVID lockdown caveat to that right at the moment, okay? But you can also see that LinkedIn is very much in a growth phase. I think where we are all sort of working at home, we're working remotely, etc. LinkedIn is actually seeing a growth in that platform because people are using it on that business sort of side of things to do their business networking that they can't perhaps do face-to-face at the moment. In terms of social media strategy, one of the resources that you'll be sent out, I've included a really, really simple, I've tried to make a couple of links that you can actually go to if you want to download a social media strategy as part of your marketing strategy. So there are some links on the final slide, but in the resources that I've included, there is literally a 2-pager which won't necessarily help you do an overarching social media strategy, but it's almost kind of maybe a social media strategy about a particular objective that you might have identified within your enterprise, and it's just set some key questions out for you, so that you've got some boxes that you can fill in to give you that kind of prompt. So I've tried to make sure that you actually will be able to go away from the session through the follow-up email from Paul with some practical support as well. So things like social media planners, as I say, sort of social media content, event planners, that sort of thing. So please do use them. What I would say is that thinking ahead and looking at how you are going to plan, I would even have next year's planner up on the wall and think, what are my key dates for next year that I then might need to actually, you know, bring into a marketing strategy or start thinking about social media content. And that could be that if you work in the area of mental health, we've obviously got Mental Health Week, so you'd want to have that date. You want to know what that date is for next year. Put it on a calendar somewhere and then start thinking about when you need to work back and what you need to build in terms of a social media campaign. And that will often be that we might have a 2-week, a 4-week or a 6-week staged campaign. So there's always maybe a hold the date, you know, that mental health awareness week is October, whatever it might be. So hold the date, make people aware. The next week you might want to release something in terms of a statement about your own organisational approach about the importance of mental health, and maybe include a sort of a case study from some intervention that you've done previously, or a testimonial from somebody that you've worked with. Make sure that you get their permission to use, etc. And then the next week it might be that you want to actually do a release of some events that you're going to be running. So how can people get involved with that? And then it might be that you kind of like start talking about speakers and their background. So there's always a reason to put some social media out. So if we're talking about a campaign now at the moment, as opposed to sort of individual posts. So think about what that messaging is and what the value is to the next piece of communication that you're going to be putting out. Keep things so that there is a flow. People can kind of identify it all as being your approach to Mental Health Week and build up to that. And then when we do events, one of the things that we've done a fantastic campaign to get to the event, and then we run the event, and then we forget to do any social media at all. But actually being dynamic, and this is with the caveat that we can either do that online or in the current circumstances, or that we may be able to get to doing things in venue next year, fingers crossed. But do use your social media actively at the time. So to post out, you know, about speakers, make sure you tag in, you know, the name of the speaker. So do that bit of prep beforehand, so that you know that you're following that keynote speaker that you've invited to your mental health conference, if you like, and that then you tag them in with a nice photograph and off you go. And then also to do the thank yous. So it's really important that we do our thank yous, that we appreciate people's time. Maybe they've helped sponsor, maybe they've provided great food. Maybe there's been just a really, really good buzz in the room. So often, you know, we get a lot of people kind of having a, you know, a hands up group wave post or something like that at the end of an event. So think ahead about how you're going to plan that campaign. If you're running multiple campaigns, and that may be a little bit more in the general run of social media through the year, I often think of a wave pattern. So you've literally got one event that you're perhaps running, which is the peak of your wave. And then you've got one which you're saying thank you because you've completed that event. So you're sort of, that's declining, if you like, but you're doing all your thank yous and we really appreciate it. Maybe you're doing a short post to say this project is closed, but we had 198 participants and we did 100 hours of direct support. And you know, we've had this great testimonial back from somebody that had that individual. Doing those little sort of 3 highlights is a really, really good wrap up to any project or event series, etc. But while that's going into decline, you're then also perhaps beginning to think about the next project that's going to be sort of coming up. So you almost have a sort of a 3-line wave that staggers. So often if I'm dealing with marketing and social media on behalf of clients, I've kind of at those 3 stages, and I'm sort of managing different things at the same time. And also, you know, being proactive, and that again is that little piece that I sort of mentioned about, you know, saying thank you, wishing people well. If you see that one of your clients has got a new bit of funding, send them a congratulations, you know, and build that community, build that relationship with people that you want to connect with. I think these very, very quick reminders, this is almost a little bit of a homework page. Feel free to do a quick screen capture if you wanted to, but as I say, the slide pack will be available to you. But these really are your prompts. So as you are looking at any social media, why are you doing it? Why is that the best investment of your time at this moment, in terms of what are you doing? How does it fit within perhaps a wider campaign? What are you using the right social media platforms? Are you really sort of clear about what you would consider as a measure of success? Is it that you get one tweet on maybe a news platform, so like the West Midlands Business Desk or the Chamber of Commerce or something like that? Would that be your measure of success if you got 3 people signed up through your social media, you know, onto a new project? Is that a measure of success? Is it that you want it retweeted 20 times? Is that your measure of success? So sort of being able to actually be quite clear about that. I also use, on each project that I run for a client, I have a kind of like a briefing doc. So what's it about? Who does it benefit? What do they get? How do they engage with it? And how will I know it's successful, kind of thing, whatever those measures might be. So have it in mind, and then you can begin to use, as I say, your sort of analytics behind, whether it's your website, if you get your Google Analytics from your website sent through to you, or go into your settings and look at your Twitter and Facebook pages, as I've mentioned before. Very, very quick example of something like a social media calendar that you could look to use. And again, what you can see there is that you've got the prompt around the different platforms. Now, you may choose to not put something on Pinterest, but at least make it an active choice. And focus on the platforms that you've done that little bit of research around, which are the ones that work for you best. But you can see there, you know, often we still have to do social media over weekends. Now, if your role is a Monday to Friday role, you might need to look at scheduling posts through Facebook or Twitter, or through a multiple social media platform management tool like Hootsuite. So that would mean that you can put out posts even if you're on holiday or if it's the weekend. Me personally, I like to do posts quite dynamically, but that's the way my right brain thinks. If I were a little bit more left brain, I could go, I've done all my social media posts for the next 3 months, but I don't know what's going to come up as well. So even if you do pre-schedule posts, don't assume obviously that if something interesting kind of happens within your sector, or for one of your customers, or for one of your referral partners, or whatever, you can still do that dynamically. You can still do sort of ad hoc posts. So there's a bit of a balance there between convenience often, and actually kind of that little bit of resonance that you get when you're in the moment, is what I find personally. One of the organisations that I personally think is doing really, really good social media, so I would just sort of say here where, you know, I've sort of talked about videos and surveys and votes and, you know, sort of really getting in the mix of things, is actually Birmingham Enterprise Community. They are doing some really, really good social media at the moment. So go and find organisations that you like what they're doing, and then perhaps with what we've sort of discussed today, You can have a little bit of an analysis, even if it's just in your own head or jotting it on a notebook, about why is it that is good? You know, is it their content? Is it their regularity? Is it their design style? Is it how they use their sort of language, and the strength of their communication, that kind of thing. So that's probably one of the easiest ways you can improve your own social media. Go and find somebody that you admire, that inspires you, and then actually follow them and look, but with that sort of mindfulness about how they're doing, what they're doing, and how it makes you feel, because that's what social media mostly is. It's about, you know, creating that emotion to respond to that sort of call to action. And do lots of stuff, you know, sort of regular posts, keep it consistent. You know, if you are going to do posts, don't suddenly go, oh, I haven't posted anything for 3 months. I wonder why I haven't engaged with anybody, or they've not engaged with me. So, you know, be consistent, be regular, but always have something to say, rather than just putting a post out for the sake of. Use things like blogs and link those in, as we've discussed. And quite rightly, as we talked about at the beginning, remember it is public. So my absolute is keep it positive. So that's really, really important, I think. We've talked a little bit about storytelling essentials. Due to time, I'm actually going to close the session there, unless anybody would like to reflect any further. I'm thinking that maybe if we've got 10 more minutes, that we just have a sort of like an open conversation. If anybody's got any questions, anything they'd like to ask me or ask of the group, I'm very, very happy to do that. Would that be a good use of time? Yeah, 10 minutes to do that. So I'm going to stop the share there. So anybody got anything that's kind of like hit a sort of a consciousness? Anybody got any questions where it's like, how can we go back to that and talk about that in a little bit more detail? Yes, Davey.
Yeah, what is kind of, thank you anyway, what is kind of said to me is that, yeah, that there's no way that I am going to be able to do this, and so as an organization, we need to outsource a marketing, the whole marketing strategy campaign, and have somebody who is a dedicated poster, for want of a word. So my question really is about outsourcing, and sort of any particular tips around how to go about that, or what to be aware of, I suppose.
I think if you're going to outsource, as I said, it's still your business.
Sorry to bother you. I just wanted to know if there was any update regarding...
Oh, sorry. Don't worry, PK, it's fine. I wasn't sure if it was another question coming in. So I think it's your business. There's two ways to look at it. Nobody's going to know your business as well as you do. Equally, often writing content, if one is not a natural content copywriter, it can be easier when you're a third party. I'd say particularly with websites, that can often be a lot easier to have someone else write your website and work with you. And I think that's the key, is finding somebody that you can work with is really, really super important. And it may be that I would consider that maybe a temporary measure to kind of get you started, to gain a bit more confidence. I think it's really important, the working with. So the way that some organisations, they actually have the person as almost as part of their team. But at the same time, it's about capacity building back to the organisation, rather than taking something away, doing something magical, and then going, well, there you are. So it's about growing that understanding and that knowledge base within your organisation. And I think that is really, really, personally, I think that's really important. And I would almost say that as a marketing person, is you kind of outgrow the need to actually outsource, because if your marketing's going well, then the likelihood is that you can then perhaps look at a marketing intern, that you can look at taking somebody on part-time, or eventually you can grow that to being perhaps a mixed full-time role, and it could be marketing, events and PR as an example. That sort of, that trilogy fits together quite well. So outsourcing can be a great way to get started on doing that. And I think, again, talk to people, you know, who do they use? What do you know, if you like what you see, for example, with Living Well Consortium, that I know you're all connected with, if you like what they do with their marketing, you know, have that conversation to kind of go, well, you know, that seems to be working really well. It's somebody that understands your sector as well. So let's say if I were a marketing specialist in hospitality, would I come and say to you personally, I can do your marketing for you, Davy, as a health and wellbeing provider? No, I know hospitality. I don't necessarily know, understand, or have a passion about health and wellbeing kind of thing. So look for that resonance. And as with everything, it's got to be somebody that you are comfortable with. But I would encourage you to make sure that everything they do goes back into your organisation. So if they produce templates, if they produce copy, if they, you know, do images, etc., it comes back into your organisation so that you have those marketing assets within your organisation. Does that answer the question fully enough at the moment?
Yeah.
Anybody else? Any key questions, burning ambition to know anything more, all things marketing? No? We're all good to go. So just very, very quickly, literally in the last couple of minutes, what would be really interesting is if you go back to your 3 words at the beginning of the session, and perhaps just look at those again, and you may even want to write next to them in a sort of a second column, how you're now feeling. Is there a little bit more knowledge that you've gained? Is there a little bit more confidence that you've gained? Is your curiosity spiked and you want to know even more? Are there bits which you're almost, because we can open up the subject and it can become kind of a bit wider and almost a bit more confusing before we then sort of get to grips with it and perhaps sort of start filtering down and feeling a bit more confident that actually I kind of know which social media platforms I want to work with. So maybe you're feeling more confident, maybe you're feeling more confused, maybe you're, as I say, feeling more curious, or maybe you're thinking, I need to go back and have a strategic conversation about this, and you feel empowered to do that. Is there anything that, and on those sort of 3-word comparisons, is there anything that anybody would like to share? Yes, Amani. And Carmi, I'll come back to you next. Yeah, pop all your speakers on so we can chat more.
Probably I've written down one of the words as creative. So I think you mentioned earlier creative content. So I think, I mean, I spend a little bit of time on social media. You get to see how people market things and how creatively they might do it. And I think it's probably just one of those things, is probably a question as well, actually, of how to extend one piece of content and to really just pull it apart and kind of market it in the best way possible. Say, if it's got something to do with a project, would it be better to split apart how to access it, what the eligibility for it is, things like this, whether you can kind of extend one piece of content and utilize it in many different ways on the same platform. Say, put it in a story, put it in a highlight, things like that. So Yeah.
I think that's a really good idea, and as I mentioned, Stephen Bartlett, so you know, he does that really, really well. There's often sort of he uses Instagram a lot, and it will be a sort of a flick book through to go, this project or this thought, this is what I mean. He might have 5, 6, 7 kind of slides that follow it through. The other thing that is fairly easy to do on platforms like Canva and Crello is producing your own design content. So they have all the design templates there. You can choose the template that appeals to you most, and then you can put in your logo. You can replace the picture with one of your pictures. You can often recolor to a degree so it fits a bit more perhaps your brand colors. But you can do videos as well, where if you go onto the iSE YouTube, there is a summary of services little video. It's just some square sort of slides with just wording about each of the areas that iSE works on, and that was basically produced in Crello, so CRELLO, very, very similar to Canva, CANVA. It just allows you to take the strain of the design work, if you like, but still personalize it. And you can produce really, you know, short little videos, you know, nothing overly complicated, that kind of thing. So maybe that's something that would be useful to help tell that story a little bit more as well. But that was an example on the iSE YouTube channel, the summary of services. And we did a micro campaign over a week where we did the sort of announcement of the services, did a post each day focusing on one area of the core services that are offered through iSE, and then at the end of the week we did a summary of services, which was the sort of the same flat graphic side that introduced the service, but then there was a sort of a thank you, a kind of an output or an outcome post that went with it. So it sort of was a slightly larger piece, but relatively simple and you know, quite easy to do, even if you don't feel particularly confident in terms of, you know, your own design ability. That's where they take the strain out of it. Anybody else? Carmi, you had something you wanted to mention, I think.
I was going to say that I started the session contemplative, complacent, if my words work, complacent and continuous social media for me.
I like an alliteration.
I did have 4, but one was yours. It was curious, so I'm taking that one off. But now it's changed, and if I'm going to pick 3 words: excitement, I feel inspired, and I'm ready to get going.
Oh,
yeah. So thank you for the session, because it's really helped to. I think all of us at some degree have used social media or been involved at different levels. This for me has helped to just, I don't know, just pinpoint certain areas that we need to revisit. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for that. I feel very, very humbled, and I do appreciate that feedback. Thank you. That's very kind.
Right, thank you.
Has anybody else anything, or do we do a last big wave and close the session? I know there is another session next week. I don't know if people are signed up to that, and that's really looking at websites in more detail. So I think I've entitled that one Is Your Website Wonderful? Sorry, Carmi, you're on mute. You're off. Okay. Are we all? Are we happy to say goodbye? And I might see some people next week. And if not, as I say, I'll ask Paul to send the slide pack out. I think the video will be going on the iSE YouTube, and obviously Living Well Consortium have access to this video as well. So I wish you all well and have a lovely day. It's beautiful sunshine over here. So I hope in the middle of lockdown, get out, get a little bit of vitamin D. You've all sat inside quite long enough listening to me. So perhaps a bit of a walk and go and have a cup of coffee outside if you can for a moment. Okay. Thank you so much for joining me today. Lovely to meet you all. And
thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
That was really helpful.